What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I have an album review for you. So yet another one that came out on the 14th of October, busy fucking week, was the newest offering from Imprecation, In Nomine Diaboli. This comes out on Dark Descent Records. This band formed in 1991 in Houston, Texas. This is only their third full-length, however. They pretty much just started off doing demos before and then broke up, I believe, sometime around 1998, and then reformed in 2009, and then they started putting out full lengths. Now this band, we actually reviewed their last one very early on in the budding years of this channel, and it was kind of cool to return to this one just because we became fans courtesy of that last album. We actually recently saw them at MDF. They put on a hell of a performance, and for those that don't know, this is just flat out evil, blasphemous fucking death metal. This band's sound is very much rooted in 90s death metal. Lots of Morbid Angel, Incantation, and I would even say Drawn and Quartered, and possibly Immolation kind of mixed in here, especially early Immolation. This band loves that very kind of chaotic, kind of distant, ugly death metal. Lots of twisting and turning riffs, ugly tremolo riffs, big death doom moments. Pretty much baseline, that can accurately describe a lot of their sound. That and, well, a lot of Latin. This band loves Latin about as much as they love Satan. Thankfully, there are only 2 tracks in here that are in Latin. I believe the last one had 3 tracks that were in Latin, and I struggle at pronouncing literally everything. This album opens up very furiously and ugly. The guitar tone is very thick, murky, kind of muddy and sludgy, and with some good reason. The mastering job was done by Dan Lowndes of Cruciamentum, who has been busier than shit this year. There's just a super thickness to this, but this was mixed by one Mike Barbecue, which honestly I don't know anything about him other than the fact that he has actually mixed, I believe, the last 2 Imprecation albums. And production-wise, this is very similar to those, albeit I think this one is maybe even muddier and kind of uglier. The mix on here is very guitar-centric. They have the guitars very much out front, and with a thick, nasty, disgusting guitar tone like that, why the fuck wouldn't it be? But sadly, some of the other stuff gets kind of pushed to the background, namely the vocals, which sound kind of muffled at times, and especially the drums, because there are moments on here where I think the snare kind of gets buried, and you can kind of lose the rhythm, which is kind of rough because this band likes to transition from unbelievably fast blast beats and just twisted tremolo riffs to super slow fucking death doom chugs and big waves of synthy atmosphere. And I think synths play a slightly bigger part on this album than say the last one. Now it is important to note that this is the last album with Ruben Elizondo on drums. He sadly died last year of COVID. He also did all the synths on here, and honestly, I think he makes a hell of a performance on here, but I'd have to say the synth work is what really stands out. His drum work is very aggressive, and unfortunately the mix kind of muddies it up a little bit, but he has this just unhinged style. While there wasn't a lot of nuance to his style, he made up for it with raw fucking aggression. But I really like the synth work on here. It's very old school. It's sort of like Halloween, creepiness, which that totally fucking fits here. And I want to preface this as it's not a dig. It kind of reminds me of Castlevania, which I love that series, and I always thought the music was really cool for that, especially boss battles and stuff like that. But it reminds me a lot of the Super Nintendo through PS1, Symphony of the Night, that sort of thing. And it definitely creates a lot of cool moods in here when it's either peppered in the background behind the riffs, because I mean with the mix everything's kind of behind the riffs, or just sort of isolated to intro a song. But the main focus of this is just raw evil aggression, and man, does this band fucking have it. Songs like Ars Goetia, I think I said that wrong. Anyway, that song sort of navigates between both death thrash and death doom. You have big, chunky death doom single chugs on there, and then big, fast thrash metal sections on there that sort of pivot back and forth. You also have massive triplet chug riffs. This band is just all about the heavy. And the vocals I think are very interesting in here because they're not low guttural vocals. I bring up Incantation and Immolation, you think very low guttural vocals. This actually has more of a mid-range, and it's this raspy growl. And it works really well in here, especially when they double it up or add in extra vocals to sort of pivot off of. Especially on the song Bringer of Sickness. That song has some extra bleh on it, and I always appreciate that. But there are some extra vocals in a section where I guess you could say it's the chorus, because, well, these songs aren't necessarily structured around the whole verse-chorus thing. This is, again, wild, just unhinged death metal. but there are some moments in there where they just throw in like some extra bless, and I don't know, it always just works for me. Like, I just think, you know, it kind of embraces the whole campy fun of death metal. I have to say, I think this one might be slightly more aggressive than the previous two. This kind of just launches into just a barrage of songs that are very aggressive, kind of unhinged, and almost kind of bordering on death grind. Songs like Agnus Dei, D-I, I don't know, it's D-E-I, whatever, I can't pronounce that one either, and Forward the Spears both have kind of a death grind sort of feel to it. Like a little bit of Terrorizer and early Exhumed kind of worked its way in, or even going back as far as just like some straight up kind of twisted grindcore riffs you'd hear from Repulsion. But I think that adds like a level of ferocity to it that maybe wasn't on the previous albums. Not as though those albums weren't just aggressive as fuck, but that whole death grind sound, kind of different, like it's a different kind of anger. And that is kind of a good example of the styles of riffs that are on here. Again, you have thrashy riffs, you have more grindcore oriented ones, you have big death doom chugs. You even have some more brutal death metal sort of chugs on Thorns of Hate, which I think is a giant standout on this. It starts off very slow and lumbering, but the riffs themselves don't necessarily sound straightforward death doom. There are some palm muted chugs in there that scream more suffocation than anything else. And Thorns of Hate represents a very interesting point on this album for me, because I think this is where like songwriting dynamics really start to come out to play a little bit more. Unfortunately, a lot of the first half of this album, actually the first 6 tracks, well, I think a good chunk of it is really good. A lot of it is sort of hampered by the fact that these songs twist and turn a lot, and there are a lot of rapid fire transitions. And with the mix that's on here, it is kind of hard to make out those transitions sometimes, or even sort of catch up to them. In fact, there are even some times in here where I think the vocal cadence seems a little bit off the beat, which kind of makes it hard to follow. But Thorns of Hate opening up with slower, more distinct riffs, and then working its way into the more chaotic, fast material really kind of worked as a reset, because the last 4 tracks in here really stood out to me a lot. Forward the Spear still has that sort of grindcore energy to it, but it kind of moves a little bit differently. It feels more deliberately paced, and it actually has some distinct hooks and riffs that stand out, which is a big thing on these last 4 tracks. I think that the riff work on here really starts to shine. Stigmata Wounds is probably one of the big standouts on here for me. It is the longest track on here, and it takes its time building this doomy atmosphere. It has a big synthy start that's just extra creepy, and then it just sort of builds into this ultra sinister fucking dark song. And it's paced well. It starts off very doomy, starts building into more galloping riffs, eventually does get faster. There's some really cool distinct melodies on it, and the vocals being layered and extra creepy I really like. And the end of it I think is especially cool, because they kind of do like a Hell Awaits sort of, you know, moment at the end where it kind of sounds like the beginning of Hell Awaits, but it's actually a false ending because the song builds back up and then ends again. And the same thing for No Kingdom Awaits, Let Us Pray, that's P-R-E-Y. This song again kind of slows down the pace of the song building itself. The transitions aren't as knee-jerk. For the first 2 minutes, it's essentially the same riff but played differently. Like, it starts off as just the open doomy chords, then it moves into triplet chugs, then to an evil tremolo riff, and it all really works. You also have these synths playing and a nice little melody in the background that just fits right, and it builds to a big evil chaotic finish with some really creepy synths to outro the album. While there were moments like this on the first 6 tracks of the album, it kind of felt like it was a little bit rushed, like they were in a hurry to get to the next riff. Reborn in Fire was probably one of the few that really kind of laid on one particular melody and repeated it. It has a really solid sludgy riff to it that's just fucking awesome. But there's a good chunk of it that kind of gets lost to the chaotic nature of the music itself and the very muddy mix on here. And because of that, there's a good chunk of this that didn't necessarily stand out as much. While it was very chaotic, heavy, and definitely evil sounding, it was kind of hard to really grab onto parts to kind of create that fun little earworm that makes you want to go back to the album. But overall, I thought this was pretty good. This is just solid, straightforward, old school, very blasphemous death metal, and I like that sort of thing. So overall, I'm going to give this 3 stars. This is a solid album. I think maybe they've done better in the past, but still this is really good. I just think with a slightly more clear mix, and at least maybe like the drums being a little bit more up in the mix, namely the snare, I think a lot of this probably would have translated a little bit better. Some of it is kind of hard to follow at times, and that is kind of a thing I like about more chaotic bands. Like, I'm listening to Immolation right now, and I appreciate how insane their music is, but if the mix is too muddy, it can be kind of hard to follow. That, and in terms of songwriting, they kind of backloaded this album with honestly the best tracks on it. I think The last 4 tracks in here are absolute fucking standouts, and I would love to hear more of that in the future because those last 4 songs in particular are just fucking awesome. There's a lot of cool elements to this, again, like some more death grindy stuff, the death doom moments, like they kind of go all over the map of extreme death metal oriented stuff, and for the most part it is pretty good. There's just a few rough patches on it. So if you're a big fan of Morbid Angel, Incantation, Immolation, Drawn Quartered, stuff like that, definitely check this band out. Pretty fucking solid album. So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you're new to the channel, subscribe because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. There's a link to our Patreon there, and there's also our shop. You can check out our shirts, and you can check out audio versions of our episodes in case you just don't want to look at us. Honestly, I think hearing us is possibly just as bad as looking at us, so yeah, choose your poison. And of course, thank you all to everyone that has liked, subscribed, followed, commented, all that shit. You guys make this so much fucking fun, and I still have not fallen out of love with this or metal, so hopefully I'm going to be around doing this for a while. I mean, honestly, I don't think I have anything better to do than listen to metal and talk to you guys, and honestly, that does not sound lame in any way. I mean, it probably sounds lame to some people, but I don't listen to them. So once again, thank you all so much, and we will catch you later.